transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning and welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler. Today, when the best thing you can do for land is save it, we discuss the power and strategy of land trusts. Then, teaching theater to students with learning differences, we meet the cast of a new production at the Greenwood School. And the faces of James Weldon Johnson Park. A new exhibit showcases their photos and stories. Join the conversation. Give us a call on air at 904-549-2937 or head to firstcoastconnect.org, where you can find all the ways you can connect with us. And while you're there, you can also sign up for our new daily newsletter, which delivers program information and a sneak peek at upcoming guests to your inbox each day. Stick around. We'll be back right after the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. Over the weekend, President Trump wrote online, threatening to bomb Iran's power plants and saying he did not want a deal. This morning, Trump wrote there are talks underway between the U.S. and Iran. NPR's Tamara Keith reports Trump says they've been, quote, very good and productive.
On Saturday, Trump had given Iran 48 hours to fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz, or he said the U.S. would hit and obliterate their various power plants, starting with the biggest one first. But in a new post, the president says he is pleased to report the U.S. and Iran have had productive conversations, quote, regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East. He said the talks would continue through the week, and he would postpone military strikes on Iran's energy infrastructure for 5 days, subject to the success of the meetings. This comes a little more than 2 weeks after Trump said there would be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender, and that the U.S. should choose the country's leaders. Tamara Keith, NPR News.
However, Iran's foreign ministry says there is no dialogue between Tehran and Washington. The Iranian Foreign Ministry says President Trump's statements are within the framework of efforts to reduce energy prices and to gain time to implement his military plans. There's been a deadly crash on the runway of New York's LaGuardia Airport. An Air Canada regional jet hit a fire truck upon landing late last night. The pilot and co-pilot were killed. The fire truck was going to investigate an odor at a different jet. Catherine Garcia is the executive director of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey.
It is anticipated that the airport will be closed at least until 2 p.m. this afternoon to facilitate the investigation by NTSB, which has already begun to be on site.
She says several people remain hospitalized, some with serious injuries. President Trump says he will deploy ICE agents to airports around the country. TSA agents are not getting paid because of the partial shutdown at the Department of Homeland Security. There are reports of long security lines at some airports. NPR's Milton Guevara went to investigate.
Long lines at some of the nation's airports are a moving target. Brandy Simpson was told by her colleagues that security lines at Hartsfield, Jackson, and Atlanta were really bad.
They had horrific delays.
But in her case,
it took 3 minutes. Instead of 3 hours, it was 3 minutes.
Some transportation security officers remain optimistic, despite working without pay, like OB in Orlando, who asked that we only use his initials because he's not authorized to speak to the media.
We felt it on some days, but other days, we've kind of picked up the pace and did the best we could. For the most part, we were getting it done, man.
Milton Guevara, NPR News.
You're listening to NPR.
Good morning. You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's 9:04. The city of St. Augustine wants to know where people find out about meetings and events, so they've launched a survey to figure it out. For more information or to take the survey, you can visit the city's website at citysainaug.com. You have through the end of the month to participate. Blueberry farmers in Florida are trying to recover from this winter's freezes. As Jessica Mazzaros reports, Central Florida was hit hard with many growers losing up to 80% of their crop.
Floridians experienced rare Arctic cold weather January 31st and February 1st. Austin Siggety has been a blueberry grower outside Dade City for a decade.
This would be the worst freeze that we've encountered.
He lost about 40% of his crop.
But I know people that lost all of it.
He says low temps in the 20s combined with dry air and high sustained winds made it difficult to effectively protect the blueberries.
It'll cook your fruit and your flowers and whatnot.
To bounce back, Siggety says he's going to harvest the crop he does have and cut back the bushes to encourage new growth for next year.
You take care of it no matter what it is.
Florida's blueberry season wraps up in May, so we'll have a better idea of the impact by early June. I'm Jessica Mazzaros in Tampa.
It'll be warm this afternoon with temperatures reaching the mid to upper 80s, and we'll have sunny skies here in northeast Florida. During the overnight hours, a cold front is expected to move through, bringing with it the chance for scattered showers and even a few storms.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, celebrating a century of supporting efforts to promote a just, equitable, and sustainable society. More at mott.org/100.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler. Today, how a movement built on voluntary land donations of development rights has helped preserve sensitive land in perpetuity. Later in the program, a local school reaches neurodiverse students through stage performances and a photo exhibit that profiles the denizens of a historic downtown park. But first, more than 100 years after the first conservation land trust was created, the model has preserved more than 60 million acres nationwide. Here to tell us how it works and why it succeeded, we're joined by Ashley Demosthenes. She's the Land Trust Alliance Chief Executive Officer. Ashley, good morning.
Good morning.
We're also joined by Ramesh Buch, North Florida Land Trust's Director of Conservation Acquisitions. Ramesh, welcome back.
Happy to be here.
So the core of a land trust is essentially private voluntary land that is in some way acquired by a land trust. Explain to us, Ashley, why is the private and the voluntary part so foundational to the idea of a land trust?
Thank you, Anne. That's a great question. So in our country, you have the right to own land, correct? And as a private landowner, you have the ability to manage your property according to the bundle of rights that you have as a landowner. You can also voluntarily relinquish some of those rights to protect that land in perpetuity. Land trusts are set up to be the beneficiary and the receiver of those rights, to hold them forever. And so it's a unique structure of an organization to be able to do that, and they are promising that they will steward and essentially honor the terms of that agreement, of that conservation agreement, forever. So land trusts are uniquely suited as organizations to be able to receive those grants of conservation easements.
But these are not takings. These are land.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Completely voluntary. I'll give you an example. My family voluntarily donated a conservation easement on land that we own in South Carolina. And it was one of the most, I think, proud moments for my family and for myself, my older sister and younger brother. We were delighted that my father made the decision to do that. And we didn't feel at all like our opportunity on the land was in any way compromised. If anything, it was a legacy and something that I feel very proud of, that it's now permanently protected.
And you're from South Carolina. You've worked for a long time in preservation in sort of the low country area of South Carolina. For someone like yourself, like your family, that chooses to make a land trust agreement like this, what does it look like for you and for your family members? Is this land that you make this agreement and then you have to vacate?
No. The easements are tailored to every single piece of property, and it's really a conversation. That's where it begins between a land trust and a landowner. And you try to unpack what is the landowner's vision for this piece of land. What do they want to continue to do? Do they want to reserve rights to create a family compound for their family members? Do they want to be able to harvest timber, hunt, fish, manage the land for wildlife, improve habitat? There's all kinds of things that can still be done on the property. Essentially, what a landowner typically gives up in that context is the right to multiple subdivisions of the land, commercial development, industrial use, those sorts of things that are considered in some cases where you have high conservation value. Those could be incompatible uses for the protection of the natural resources on that land.
So you work on a national level. What are you doing in town right now? I know we'll start to talk about the work of the North Florida Land Trust, but
Yes.
what are you here for, and what sort of guidance or resources do you provide to local land trusts?
So I am here in Jacksonville visiting with the North Florida Land Trust. They invited me as the new-ish CEO of the Land Trust Alliance to come down and join them.
You're going on a year now with as the leader.
I am. And so I came down to join them in a celebration of their incredible work and accomplishments in this part of Florida. I'm on a tour essentially across the country and visiting with multiple land trusts. And for me, being up close and personal with the staff of land trusts, with the leadership, and being on the ground to see the land that they're protecting is very important. I appreciate that kind of direct approach and getting out to visit the people that are doing the work. The Land Trust Alliance is an organization that supports the people who are doing the work. So we provide resources, capacity building, technical training, professional development. We write the standards and practices for land trust for their organizations. If you wanted to start a land trust, you would start by going to the Land Trust Alliance first and understanding, how to set up an organization. We also are defenders of conservation at the federal level. So we make sure that the tax incentives remain in place, that excellence is a core value for our land trusts, to make sure that integrity is baked into all the work that is done. And we provide advocacy at the federal level for programs to make sure that there's funding available through the Farm Bill, as an example, to make sure that farms and ranches and timberlands there's funding available to protect those resources across the country.
Ramesh, you run the acquisition arm of the North Florida Land Trust, but tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this work in the first place.
Well, how much time do we have? My background's in marine biology, and I started right out of grad school in Miami-Dade working for their environmental department. And after about 5 years of picking up water quality samples and then managing data, I wanted a little more of a legacy aspect. And Miami-Dade had one of the first local land conservation programs in the state. It's called the EEL program, Environmentally Endangered Lands program. And I applied and got the job to assist the director of that program. It had been running about 5 years. And she had been managing and buying land, but had a hard time organizing the data and telling the story. And that's what I had been doing as a water quality manager. After 5 years, I thought, well, I'd like to try my own program. And Alachua County here in Gainesville had just passed their local program. And I went and applied to be their first program manager and stood that up, ran it for 16 years. And then they were on their third or fourth bond referendum to refund the program. And I wanted a bigger fishbowl to be in, and so I applied for and worked for the Water Management District. Florida's divided into 5 water management districts, and I worked for the St. Johns River Water Management District as their real estate director. So my catchment area, if you will, went from 1 county to, I think, all a part of 16 counties. And that was 5 years, and then I got to my 30 years, retired, and worked for the Land Trust. I've been doing that now. This is my 4th year, will be 5th year in October.
And help us understand, how do the challenges in North Florida differ perhaps from the other areas that you've worked in, like in South Florida?
Well, I'll tell you, the nice thing about working in North and North Central Florida is that you have opportunities to save tremendous acreage. We just closed on 1,700 acres, a donation of a conservation easement. When I was working in Miami-Dade, we were lucky to get 5-10 acres at a time and celebrated those. Now, those 5-10 acres are some of the most rare and threatened habitats in the world. So in that case, but you could stand in the middle of it and still hear cars and trucks and airplanes. Here, you can stand in the middle of a preserve and you almost hear nothing. Some of the challenges are the funding is tighter, the tax bases are smaller, and so you're having to work harder. The landowners, though, have been tied to the land, much longer here in North Central Florida, North Florida. Some of these agricultural families go back to, prior to Spanish Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And they have, as Ashley was describing, they have a real vision for wanting to keep it the way they found it, the way they inherited it from their grandparents. And they almost feel like they're betraying that legacy. And so the conversation that Ashley was describing, around the kitchen table is, what would you like to see happen? What do you want to see not happen? And then we figure out which sticks in that bundle would damage that vision and say, okay, we can take care of this forever for you.
Let's talk about funding, because we started off talking about something that's a conservation easement, basically guarantees the land in some use other than presumably intensive development over a lifetime, over its lifetime, forever, essentially.
Right.
So what is funding needed for? There's some circumstances where instead of doing an easement, a conservation easement, you're actually outright buying property.
That's right. And even some easements are purchased.
Mm-hmm.
So as Ashley alluded to, there really, what you're looking for is what's the financial situation of the family or the entity that owns the land, and how to make that rewarding for them financially, if that's what they're after. And that can happen two ways. It could be cash. So you could purchase that easement. You appraise that bundle of sticks, and then you appraise the bundle of sticks without the sticks you've removed, and the difference is the value of that easement, and you can provide them cash for that. And there's some good state programs here in Florida that could do that. Rural and Family Lands, operated by the Forestry Service, Florida Forestry Service, and there's also the Florida Forever program through the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Sometimes, and in the case of the donation we recently closed, the landowner can afford to donate that easement, and the IRS treatment for donations of conservation easements is very, very beneficial. So if you're donating just real property, you can count that donation the year you donated and then carry forward any unused portion for 5 years. So it's
unused portion of
the donation value. So if it's a $1 million donation, you can only use maybe $100,000 in year one. You get to carry forward $900,000 5 more years until you've used it up or the 5 years is over. For easements, because the federal government really wanted to incentivize conservation without having to spend money, and this is really the work that LTA did back in the early 2000s, they extended it for 15 years. So when you think about land values relative to income, especially in Florida, land values go up very fast. And so you cannot use that value in 5 years. And so that's where the 15 years comes in. Think about carrying that forward 15 years, and all of a sudden you really have a chance to use up that value and really provide that liquidity back to those landowners. And so they can afford to then donate or bargain sale, which is partial donation, partial sale of that easement versus an outright sale. So when you think about a sale, you're providing them cash, they're paying taxes on it, sometimes a donation really works out in their benefit.
How does this figure in, Ashley, if there is somebody that has inherited land, whether it's land that's used for farming or land that's just vacant? Florida obviously has caps on property taxes. And so very often when somebody inherits land, the first thing that they notice is they're hit with a really big tax bill. Sometimes that forces people to sell land. So how does a land trust figure into a circumstance like that?
This happens all the time. And if a family member who inherits land wants to figure out a win-win, whereby their tax burden is reduced and protect the property, then a partnership with the land trust can assist with that. And, as Ramesh was describing, it's a process of appraising the value of the land. also appraising what rights are being given up. And the before and after value, the delta between the two is what the easement is valued at. And that's essentially, that is a charitable contribution. So that is what essentially, enables the federal income tax deduction. So it's an income tax deduction. And there are estate tax deductions as well. So that's where I think in the situation that you just described is a benefit to considering a conservation easement.
And to add on to what Ashley was saying, in Florida we primarily rely on our property tax base, and property taxes go up. Conservation easements, because they permanently restrict property, the marketability for that property is decreased. There's less of a market, therefore it's less value, and therefore it's more approachable for folks. Say, for example, you have a farm, and that farm is valued at highest and best use, which may not be farming, it may actually be development. Well, that's a real barrier for that next generation of farmers to get into, because they can't afford it. Coming out of college, they can't afford, or high school, they can't afford a mortgage on 1,000 acres of real estate in Florida. But you put an easement on it, you've removed that bundle, you've lowered the value sometimes as much as 30, 40, 50, 60%.
Yep.
That really now becomes affordable for that young person coming out of school that really has these great ideas, wants to get into farming, wants to continue that legacy. The current farmer would love to have that 4-H student, whoever it is, coming and take over from them, but the finances don't work. With an easement, it lowers that barrier permanently and lets that young person be able to afford that mortgage.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about the goals of conservation and land trusts. If you have a question for one of our experts, you can call us on air at 904-549-2937, or you can go to firstcoastconnect.org to find all the ways you can connect with us. Florida has been, in many ways over the years, tried to preserve lands, and there have been a variety of programs that have been implemented. There have been amendments passed by residents that essentially demanded land conservation, that monies be set aside. And it seems that over many years, there has been obviously a significant amount of land that has been put aside for conservation, but it does seem that has been a perpetual disappointment for residents who support land conservation, because as we've seen, the legislature will find all kinds of uses for that money that's set aside other than actually buying and preserving land, whether it's administrative costs or buying vehicles for some agency or paying salaries. How does a land trust fit into the overall architecture of trying to preserve land in Florida?
It's a great question. When I started with Alachua County, we had a very active land trust in Alachua County, Alachua Conservation Trust. And they were sort of struggling for an identity because now we had a county-funded program. What was their role going to be? And so we had a meeting, and I said, look, I see you have three roles. You're an applicant, so you can make application of land to the county program, which is what land trusts will do. We will, work with landowners and be their facilitators, be their translators, if you will, of that government bureaucracy process, be the shock absorber, because, a landowner wants a nice, smooth glide path to a deal. The agency has a bureaucracy and a process they got to get through, and we sometimes can absorb some of the shocks to the system. So we be the applicant. We can be advocates. And I think Ashley, in her keynote speech to us yesterday, and I think she mentioned this earlier, is advocacy for the practices that make land conservation really effective, tax incentives and so on the perpetual nature of easements. And then we can be the accountability partners. So land trusts can then say to their government partners, hey, you promised this would be the use of the money, or you promised this incentive would not expire, or you promised this to landowners. We need to keep those promises. And so they're the accountability part. So I always said, look, there's three roles we have, applicant, accountability, and advocacy.
Ashley, when we talk about perpetual preservation, I think we all know what that means. But there has been, as you were saying before the program, there's been a movement afoot to change what that might mean and to actually create a defined and much shorter term for what a land trust pledge for perpetual preservation would mean. Can you tell us what's happening and why that's happening?
Yes. Thank you for asking that question. So, the whole movement around land conservation, and especially voluntary private land conservation, has been underpinned by the perpetual nature of conservation easements. That is what enables landowners to receive the funding and the tax incentives. So if there is an introduction, let's say, of legislation that proposes to limit conservation easements to 20 years or 30 years, then it removes that perpetual kind of binding element of land conservation. And therefore, it doesn't have the same weight, it doesn't have the same impact. And also, there wouldn't be the tax incentives or truly the funding that comes from these programs for land conservation.
So, what would be the motive to shorten that, and how could it possibly retroactively impact agreements that have been set in place?
There is, at the federal level, an interest in enabling landowners to essentially buy back the rights that they sold. And that would be very undermining of land conservation and set a precedent for others to be able to do that if they wanted to. I don't think that the masses of landowners who have entered into a permanent agreement would want to do that. But in some cases, I think you may have a landowner that's said, I bought this land, it has this agreement on it, and I don't think I want this agreement to be there anymore.
That seems like it would allow someone to just sort of bank land, not pay taxes at the current levels for a period, and then basically game the system a little bit.
It jeopardizes the whole kind of fundamental underpinning of land conservation, and it's meant to be perpetual. It was always meant to be perpetual, and so if you reduce the time frame, there's really no assurance that land will be protected in perpetuity.
So who's pushing it and why?
It's a philosophy, and it's I think it's a mindset that's being promoted by certain groups. One is a group that is organized around a set of agenda items, and they are governed by a group of state legislators. And this comes up periodically as an agenda item, an agenda priority for them to introduce model legislation at the state level. So if it is introduced at the state level, anywhere, it could be Florida, it could be any state in the country, and it limits the duration of conservation easements to 20 years, then the concern is that would then be proliferated and spread throughout the country, essentially undermining the very essence and business model of land conservation and what land trusts do. And there would be no, assurances for the public who, have invested time and resources into these programs and conservation. So that's one element. And then there are congressional electeds that have introduced the idea of reducing easement time frame from perpetual to 20 and 30 years. And we're watching that. That's what the Alliance does very well, because we are headquartered in Washington and because we have government relations team monitoring these and working with our advocacy ambassadors across the country to help educate our elected officials about why that's not a good idea.
Ramesh, I want to ask you, I don't know if we've seen exactly that pressure here in Florida, but certainly there are lands that we think of as protected, wetlands, for instance, that very often people are surprised to learn they're not really protected. If somebody wants to develop them, very often they can just buy mitigation off-site, or they can pay some certain amount of money, or find a way to develop those lands. And more recently, we've seen at the state level, particularly with our governor, an attempt to reclaim state parkland that had been designated as a preservation area and repurpose it for perhaps for-profit enterprises like hotels, essentially, or recreational activities that might be more intensive by far than what currently is in place, like golf courses. So when it comes to the definition of, preserving something in an eternal sense, how can people have faith that that is something that will be followed, will be observed?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one that after those efforts you mentioned last year around Guana Preserve, we faced from landowners saying, hey, is this really going to be forever? Because I think what Ashley mentioned was it would be really hard today to be an elected official. With all the pressures on elected officials and demands of community, we still have the city of Tampa moving to Florida every year, right? It's just 1,000 people a day. Where are we going to put these people? But I think what we need to keep in mind is a lot of the things that people depend on, hunting, recreation. We mine our drinking water from underground, and the quality that it comes out of the ground on has a lot to do with the surface of the land. People want land conservation. And so I think to go back to that effort last year, and having worked as in a state government, county government, there is a process for disposing of or surplusing conservation land.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what people sort of lost sight of was that if somebody asks to do something with a state asset or county asset, city asset, if it's green space, you have to follow the process. You have to sort of honor the request and take it through the process right through the decision. A big part, an important part of that process is public input. And if the public feels that space should be preserved still, is worthy of preservation, they need to show up and say, no, this, you made us a promise, and I bought my house, and whatever reasons I moved here, this needs to be preserved. And that's what they did. And ultimately, the governor and the state withdrew or denied the request.
Although it was hard for them to show up. In some cases, these were hearings that were given very little notice, very little publicity. People really had to work to find out that this was happening, and then really work to participate and pushing back on that.
And that may be true, but I think that the point is, when we had this question in Alachua County, they said to me, it was year 3 or 4, they said, "Hey, Ramesh, these lands, it's called Alachua County forever. Is it really forever?" And so I researched the question, and it turned out as soon as the bonds were paid off, those covenants went away, and those lands became county assets. And
wow.
If the county decided it was in the public interest to put a fire station or a soccer field on what was green space, they could do that. Oh. And so we passed, so interestingly enough, and the numbers are now hazy, the Alachua County Forever program passed, I think, in the 60% range. So we came up with what was called the Registry of Public Protected Places. And it was a voter-approved effort that said once a piece of property is bought by the county with public dollars, we will enshrine that boundary and that purpose on this registry. Four out of 5 commissioners can vote, put it on the registry. And the only way you can change that purpose or change that boundary was to go back to the voters and ask them, do you want to change this? And that passed over 70%. So here's what I take away from that. I always remember that in Alachua County, I say 62% voted for it. I was spending 38% of the folks who said no, I was spending their dollars also. But once we passed it, a large share of those people said, well, having taken my money and having bought that land, you better do what you said you were going to do. Yeah. So it moved the needle even further. So that's why I agree with Ashley. Land conservation nationally, whether it's a red state, red county, blue county, these things pass overwhelmingly.
Sure.
And I think that's what I come back to when, the state or county says, hey, look, we're getting pressure. We got asked to do this disposal, this surplus. We need the people to show up. And whether or not they make it easy or hard, I think people just need to pay attention and say, I need to show up and protect this asset. This is what makes communities livable. These spaces.
I think it shows that in Florida that no statewide environmental initiative has ever gotten less than 70% of the vote. So there is obviously a lot of support.
Yes.
One element of this is approaching landowners or allowing landowners to come to you to talk about these conservation easements or a sale of some kind. But then there's this other effort, and I know it's something that Ramesh has been working on a lot here, is approaching county governments and asking them to create some sort of funding mechanism, like he was alluding to in Alachua County.
That's right.
There's been, I think, a concerted effort to go to them and to say, if you are interested in saving some of this land, here's a way to create a mechanism so you could pay for it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. As Ramesh mentioned just now, there is broad public support for land conservation. People are realizing, I don't think, particularly throughout COVID and the pandemic, even made that more important and clear that the public needs green open spaces to be able to, access for exercise, for mental health, for children needing access to the outdoors. It's a public health issue, quite frankly, and there's a lot of research, being done in that space around the availability of open, publicly accessible land for the general public. So it's broadly supported, and people do vote in favor of it at the ballot box. And
although I would say locally, I mean, there has been some success in Northeast Florida counties. St. Johns County is one that has twice been offered this. The voters have turned it down twice. What's going on there, do you think, that's perhaps different than where you have had some successes like Nassau or Clay?
It's hard to answer for St. Johns County, although I think recently that trend may be changing. We are working actively in St. John's because they have a program. What they need is more money, and they're one of them.
It's just not funded,
It's just
right?
not funded. And so you're quite right. We have this effort. We call it green printing. We borrowed that term from the Trust for Public Land, which is a national land trust that does this work all over the country. And what we do is we go out in advance. Usually we're invited in by a community that says, I'm tired of fighting the residents who don't want to see a piece of property developed, but it's vested property rights, and it's hard to turn that landowner down if they want to develop it. The pressure, the dollars. And we have a way forward. We says, look, let's have a conversation with the community. What are their conservation values? Is it outdoor recreation? Is it green space? Is it agriculture? Is it hunting, farming? Whatever it is, we then package that, educate the public. These are the benefits you get from land conservation. And then our partner TPL will come in and sort of assess the sources of funding that are available to local governments, whether it's property tax, a local infrastructure sales tax, other sales tax, other funding sources. And then through a series of very scientific polls of likely voters, they will determine what the tolerance is to pay for this. So if I were to say to you, Ann, hey, do you believe in land conservation? Sure. Would you pay $50 a year for that? Okay. How about $100? No, then my support drops off. And so you can see how getting the right mix of values and sources and cost is really important. And if there's a magic formula that it will pass to the ballot box, TPL will present that information to the commissioners. And they will say, okay, the citizens have asked for this. We'll put it to referendum and see if they'll pass it. If no magic formula passes, and we're seeing some of that this year because of what's going on in Tallahassee with them trying to decide whether they should have more of a discount on people's property taxes, which is the lifeblood of local government. Local governments are really afraid to take that next step. Am I going to be able to tax for land conservation? How am I going to pay for roads, water, sewer, parks, planning, codes enforcement, all these other things that those dollars go to?
Or how do you ask voters to approve a tax increase for land conservation when they're simultaneously voting for a tax cut?
Tax cut. I think what your listeners probably don't realize is of the dollar that comes out of property taxes to local government, most of that is non-discretionary. We have to pay for the constitutional officers, have to pay for the sheriff, have to pay debt service. The amount of money that goes to support all the things that makes communities livable, parks, codes enforcement, community support services, all those services comes out of a small fraction of that dollar. And that's what's in jeopardy, and including land conservation.
Ashley, just to wrap up, if people are interested in participating in this or knowing more about it, is there a certain size of property that qualifies, or is something too small? Who should be considering this?
So that's very dependent, I think, upon the mission of the land trust that is in any given community. So I've seen a range of qualified properties, but the fundamental requirement is that it contains conservation value. And so, and that is really something that's determined through a conversation with the land trust professionals and a landowner to determine what are those conservation values. So, I'm not sure how Ramesh would answer that question for your land trust.
I would add to it. It's a good question. And in Florida, we have a threshold of 40 acres.
Okay.
If a landowner, and this is a state law, if the landowner wants to take advantage of the property tax break, it's got to be over 40 acres. Otherwise, that's presumed that there's conservation benefits. Under 40 acres, there is a whole process to go through with the state that says, okay, we've determined there's sufficient conservation value in the small property. But we don't have a minimum threshold. It's bang for the buck kind of thing. There's a lot of conservation value. Big, wild, wet, and connected is kind of the saying. The bigger the property, the more value you're going to get, and the effort is worth it. But there are some, I remember doing a 10-acre bat cave with, it was a quarter of the world's population, the southeast brown bat, on a 10-acre property with a cave mouth. That was pretty worthy.
Yeah.
So size is not always important, but it's definitely a factor.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Ashley, Demosthenes, Ramesh Buch, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
This was fun.
All right. Up next, the power of theater for students with learning differences. Welcome back. Well, in just 5 years, Jacksonville's Greenwood School's theater program has evolved from conception to reality, staging multiple productions with partners around the region, including an upcoming Peter Pan origin story that opens next month. Here to discuss how the program has helped the school's neurodiverse student population, both socially and academically, we're joined by Zach Rivera, the school's theater teacher. Zach, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
We're also joined by seniors Mirabella Burt and Joe Venirica. Jay Rika, right? Sorry about that. There's like a strange thing happening in my script here. All right, Jay, I'm going to start with you because you are in a production that is, as we said, an origin story of Peter Pan. First of all, how did you get involved in theater? How did you start, and what difference has it made for you as a student and just as a person?
I got involved with theater by a homeschool co-op by doing public speaking, and then it switched to doing church plays. But then I took a long break, and it wasn't for Greenwood and Mr. Rivera that theater really became this part of me and a part of my life. And it's given me a place where I feel welcomed and just at home.
Yeah. Zach, this was something that you created. How did you decide that you wanted to bring a theater program to Greenwood School? And what were some of the obstacles that you faced when you first introduced this concept?
Absolutely. So when I interviewed to be a arts teacher at Greenwood, there wasn't really an established theater program. They were giving me a tour of the school at the interview. And one of the first questions I asked when they were telling me about the basketball team and the volleyball team was, what about the arts? Do we have a competitive thespian troupe? Do we do main stage productions? And after some conversations, we decided to start that. So it started small with, a talent exhibition here and there. And now we're doing 2 main stage productions each year, multiple talent exhibitions, multiple competitions. So, it's been absolutely wonderful. Some of the obstacles that we faced, we don't have an auditorium. We use our gymnasium for our productions, or we partner with local theater companies. And, we make it happen. That's what we always say, is we adapt and we make it happen.
Yeah. Bella, you've been a theater fan since you were a very young person, but it sounds to me like maybe you didn't start doing stage performance until later, possibly here at the school. Is that right?
Correct. So I've been a fan of theater ever since my dad introduced me to the movie Grease and Hairspray, but I never felt confident enough or, established enough in myself that I could actually do theater productions. And it wasn't until I joined Greenwood halfway through my freshman year that Mr. Rivera approached me and he's like, "Hey, we're putting on our first main stage play. You want to be King Triton?" And I'm like, "Me? Okay." And ever since then, I've fallen in love with it. It's truly an outlet for me. It's a therapy for me. I get to immerse myself into a character for hours and just, leave all my stresses and worries behind.
Oh, Jay, has it been also therapeutic for you?
Very much.
Yeah. So when you guys are working together as a cast, as an ensemble, do you find that you're able to sort of connect or help each other adapt? I mean, I imagine just stepping on into a lead role that first time, Bella, must have been pretty challenging.
Oh, yeah, it was definitely challenging. Again, we're a school with so many different personalities and differences that connecting with each other can sometimes be hard. But when you're in a theater space, everyone is on the same level. We're all, no matter your role, no matter if you're a lead, no matter if you're backstage, you're all so vital to a performance, especially in a school where, again, we do majority of our performances in a gymnasium, which is insane to think about. Like, everyone is on the same level, which when we're outside of theater, we're not on the same level. A lot of people look down on me when I'm outside in the real world because of my learning differences. A lot of people think, oh, I'm never going to make it. But when I'm in that theater space, it doesn't matter if I have ADHD. It doesn't matter if I can't go as fast as someone else, because we're all collectively working together to reach the same end goal.
Yeah. Zach, tell us a little bit about the student population and how teaching theater might be a little different. I mean, Bella's talking about having ADHD. Does that present any challenges? Do you have to take a different approach when you're teaching theater to kids at Greenwood?
Surprisingly, I would say no. I think theater lends itself to folks on the spectrum who have ADHD or dyslexia. I myself have ADHD, and I have always said that it helps my directing. Being able to multitask and handle many different problems at the same time, it can be very helpful, and it actually turns into a strength. And something as well that I think is very impactful is that we talk a lot about improv. Things that we do every day in our lives is improvise. And for students with dyslexia, improvisation, not having to necessarily memorize a bunch of lines or read an entire script, but being able to just create can be very helpful.
Jay, this upcoming performance that you and Bella are in is called Peter and the Starcatcher. And as we mentioned, it's kind of a prequel to Peter Pan. Your character at the start of this show is just boy. You're sort of an orphan, and you meet Molly, who is Bella's character, Molly Astor. Tell us a little bit about how your character evolves, and then by the end of the show, who you've become.
It's definitely a different turn of who he becomes, because at the beginning of his thing, he's this quiet, shy, very self-conscious, scared child who throughout the show goes through these great adventures and then he learns so many things, so that way at the very end of the show he becomes this big, I guess, ball of youth.
Yeah. Is it a spoiler to say who you actually become?
I don't think I would say it's in the name,
Peter Pan.
You become Peter Pan, yeah. And I think one thing that's really fascinating for your character, Bella, is that Molly Astor is actually Wendy's mom.
It was kind of strange at first because Molly and Peter have a sort of relationship, a close relationship, and then you learn, oh wait, she's actually Wendy's. It's a whole kind of like realization, like this is like kind of this soul repeat. But I think it really makes sense. Like Molly and Peter are the exact opposite, but same at the same time, and I think that really reflects onto me and Jay as people. Like I love theater, but going on forward into my life, I want to go into environmental, and I want to, take other paths. Theater will always be a passion. And for Jay, he's going to go to college for theater. He plans on becoming a Broadway star, which he will become. And I think those characters, Molly and Peter who wants to stay being a boy and stay, following his passion, and Molly who wants to grow up and take a different path. And I think those really reflect us. And
that's great. It's almost like your own journey. That's very sweet.
Yes,
so this upcoming performance, this is one of the partnerships, Zach, that you've built in the community. This is actually being performed at Players by the Sea.
Previous production was performed at Players by the Sea.
Okay.
We've performed at Players by the Sea in our last season with Almost Maine. And this season, our fall production was performed at Artist Connection Theater. So this one will be in our gym.
This one will be in the gym. It's April 16th through 18th. It's Peter and the Starcatcher, Zach Rivera, Mirabella, Burt, Jay Rika. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
All right. Up next, the faces of James Weldon Johnson Park.
Alchemy Yoga and Wellness, opening this summer in Ortega, offers a balanced approach to movement and recovery. Services include yoga, infrared sauna, cold plunge, massage, and facials in one location. More information at alchemyjacks.yoga. Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Highway, hospital, home, work. Where injuries happen can make a difference in the law and the outcome.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com.
NPR and the station keep you informed and remind us that we're all in this together.
It's not always about grand gestures. It's small acts of steadiness.
Well, I do it for free. I think it's just the drive, the commitment. Someone's got to do it.
No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And I think that's a pretty powerful way to look at the world.
Keep our connection strong. Donate to this station today.
Visit us at wjct.org/radio.
Film at WJCT presents Do the Right.
The Trump administration captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and promoted his VP. Then the U.S.-Israel operation killed Iran's supreme leader and encouraged Iranians to overthrow the regime. Now, President Trump says he's considering imminent action against Cuba, wants to push out its president. What's behind the strategy some have called decapitate and delegate? Next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. The name of James Weldon Johnson Park is relatively new, but the square on the doorstep to City Hall is the city's oldest park, dating back 160 years. Here to tell us about a photo exhibit that showcases some of its familiar faces is Barbara Colacello, storyteller and artistic director at Babs Lab. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi.
It's nice to see you again.
Yes, same here.
We're also joined by Tony Smilageach. He is a photographer and founder of the local events website, Create Jacks. Tony, nice to have you here.
Good morning.
So where did the concept come for this project in the first place, Barbara?
I think you could address Tony with that because he was more at the beginning of the idea.
Yes. So it's 160 years of James Weldon Johnson Park. That's what they're celebrating this year. Okay. So Liz brought me in. We kind of discussed a few different ideas and wanted to see how to. We didn't want to make 160 years of history it became too big of a project almost.
Yeah.
To try and tell 160 years of history with 10 images, because that's what was the idea to have at the Jesse. So instead of doing like past events or showcasing past events, I asked if we could do 10 people who aren't usually seen or who aren't usually highlighted at the park, but that's kind of the people who make the park what it is, who kind of have the memories, who shape the third spaces of places like parks. So we picked 10 people. Well, we picked a few people at the beginning, and then I was like, well, instead of me just doing the photography and the interviews and trying to tell all the stories, can we bring in Babs? And then that's how Babs got brought in.
Right, because they're beautiful portraits, but they're not just portraits. They also come with their stories, these individuals.
Exactly.
And so your whole career here in Florida is helping people tell their stories.
Yes, exactly. So it was a perfect project for me. And it's always about distilling it to that experience, that moment. I was looking for visceral connections to the park. So that sometimes it takes a little bit. People are talking about things and they have memories, but they'd say something, be like, "What exactly when that person said that to you? Where were you?" Or experience of the water in the fountain, and a little girl who's putting her hand in the fountain, and she remembers like loving to go to the park because of that fountain.
That is Phoebe Mullis, right?
Yes, Phoebe.
She's actually in charge of Art Walk and works helping to activate spaces for
Mhm.
downtown vision. This is a picture for folks watching our live stream, a picture of her, but you found out that her mom was the executive chef at Cafe Nola, and so she used to
Right.
spend a lot of time in the park sort of
Right.
waiting for her mom to
Right,
get
and
off
her
work.
grandmother would pick her up, and she has all these fond memories. That was sort of like her playground, after-school playground, and then later, when, suddenly she works downtown, it's reactivated that whole part of her, like,
Mhm.
the connection, like, you forget stuff like that. So that was interesting, and another for me, it was like listening to the changes of the park through the decades.
Yeah.
That there's the department store and the bus lets everybody off at Hemming at the time. And there's all this activity. And her grandmother worked at a seamstress over at the building over here. And just tons of stuff going on. And then someone else telling a story about there's nobody in the park. And, maybe just the homeless and she's a teenager, but they were a church group and they would go and talk to the guys and bring them
Interesting.
stuff.
One of the people that you profile too is Randy Britt, who is a park ambassador, but he actually was struggling when he first got that job. He was living in a shelter. He has since gone on to be not just an ambassador, but really helps provide the ambiance of the park. He's in charge of planting, and that has become really a source of inspiration for him as well. How did you connect with him first, Tony?
Randy was the first person.
Oh.
That was like off the bat. That's who we started with. As soon as we started discussing who could be the potential people and who are behind the scenes, Randy was the given. I mean, he works for JWJ. Everybody who spends times that
Right, they
spends
see him.
time, yeah, everybody sees Randy, and everybody has their own stories with Randy. Like after we posted some of the preview pictures, like the amount of people who either commented or talked about their experiences with Randy afterwards, or the stories that they've had, or I don't know, or just even talking to Randy on a more in-depth level. Obviously, Babs did that more, but just talking to him and seeing his pride within the park,
Yeah.
is incredible.
Tell us a little bit about Jason Benjamin, because he is another park denizen. He plays games there, Bidwist and others.
He has a great thing going. He's playing in the park. He's got the phone. He has a very great business where stuff comes in at the docks, and he has a gang of people, a team that will pick it up, and he's doing all the logistical stuff, but playing his game
at the park.
And then sometimes he has to drive to his place, but it's not that far, and he comes back. And he really feels a part of that group of players. He just loves being in the park, and he's there for events and stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's a great collection, great stories that you've collected, beautiful photographs, Tony. The exhibit is at the Jesse Great Hall through May 31st. It's called 160 Years of Stories, a photo exhibit. Tony Smiley-Geach, Barbara Colacello, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. And thank you for listening. Join us tomorrow when we discuss how to manage in turbulent financial times, from spiking gas prices to a plummeting Dow. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or BaptistJax.com. The Cummer Museum of Art and Gardens presents Art in Bloom, uniting nature and creativity with flowers made of glass, ceramics, paper, wood, and even Lego. On display through September 13th. More information available at cummermuseum.org.